Tell me you've never studied the Bible or history without telling me that you've never studied the Bible or history, especially if you are of African descent in the slightest. This person typifies this. Now, he has a whole bunch of stuff that he says that would make you think that he knows his history. He talks about Athanasius in Egypt. He talks about how the Coptic Church was established in Egypt, and that's Africa, whether people want to accept it or not. People know that Egypt isn't part of Africa. But when it comes to the transatlantic slave trade, when it comes to Christianity being forced on West African people, Egypt doesn't matter. The first thing that you need to understand is that Africa is not a country, but Africa is a continent with 53, 54 different countries in it. And prior to that, there were even more number of tribes and nations in Africa during the time frame of your so-called Jesus and thereafter. But in these statements, if Christianity was forced onto blacks via the slave trade, why do we have Christianity in Africa 1,300 years before the slave trade? Okay, my guy, understand this. This transatlantic slave trade started 1619, all right? But the trans-Mediterranean slave trade of Europeans actually going and bringing West Africans into Europe as slaves started before then. It started about a good 50, 60 years before then. So we're talking about the mid 1500s, about 100 years actually. So we're talking about the mid 1500s with two different papal bulls that truly established it, but it was already going on a little bit prior to that, primarily in the Canary Islands, the Azores, and Senegal and Mali. Now, we haven't yet got to West Africa, where the majority that went to the Americas came from. So yeah, you think you got about 1,300 years. But that place in Africa that is first established after Egypt was Ethiopia during the Aksumite Empire converting over to Christianity in 3030 CE so that he can have better relationships with Rome, who was already heavily Christianized. The Nicene Council had already happened. You can see the wave of Christianity happening in Europe by this time frame after the Edict of Milan, which made Christianity legal in 318, and then the Council of Nicaea in 325. So he saw the wave. He saw what was going on. And then only a few decades later, you have the whole of Rome becoming Christian. Christianity had to be very well established in Europe before Theodosius could have made it the religion of Rome in 381. So to say that it started in Africa, and I got a lot of other comments of people on TikTok and Facebook, it started in Africa. No, Christianity didn't start in Africa. It started in the Levant. And then from the Levant, it moved to Europe and Egypt in and around the same time, the same damn time. It moved into those portions of those areas, mainly because of Philo of Alexander in Egypt. Josephus was writing in Rome at the same damn time that this was going on. There's actually no proof of a Paul actually existing. The letters of Paul are most likely written by Philo, the Herod that was in charge of the Levant at the time, and or Judea, not the Levant, and Josephus. Their combination of writings is what produced more than likely the writings of Paul. There's no hardcore evidence of that, but most of the evidence is pointing towards that, unless you just accept by faith that Paul existed. But here's where the brainwashing gets deep on this person. And these are the things that I have a difficulty understanding. Right? He said, let me continue. Not to mention the countless millions of modern day free Africans, as well as African American blacks who never enslaved, who are Christians now of their own free will, for lack of a better term, today. Is it truly of your own free will? Can you call it your own free will? Now, this person, he is from East Africa. His family heritage is from East Africa. And he talks about how the British came into Kenya, and the missionaries converted his ancestors into Christians. And he was thankful for that, because he felt like they were being ignorant in their superstitions and their evil ways. This is what this person who knows his family comes from Kenya through the British colonization. So let me break down two things that you just seem to not understand, my guy, on this one. One, people today are not Christian of their own free will. People have never been any religion, for the most part, in groups in large numbers, of their own free will. People have become Christian or any other religion because of the nation to which they were born into, and then the family that they were born into, and the community that they were born into. You see, if you was born in America to a Christian mother and father, you were taught Christianity. Even if they weren't hardcore, hard rollers, the community around you in America, and I'm going to use where I grew up in Marietta, Georgia, everybody, the majority of people were Christian. So all your friends were Christians, all their family members were Christian. It was a normal thing that on Sundays everybody went to church, or the majority of people went to church. Businesses closed on Sunday back then. So it was a natural thing, even if your family wasn't going to church, for you to fall into the gap of Christianity, the pit, the tar pit, as it spoke of in Genesis 14, into Christianity. If you grew up in Saudi Arabia and in Dubai, you would have normally, naturally become Muslim. By the time you were born, sir, it was normal for you in Kenya to be Christian because you were surrounded by Christianity. And you could become Muslim because there's a lot of Islam in Kenya as well. But it's a normalcy of society that made you fall into the religion that you was in. Now, when you look at people whose family came from the transatlantic slave trade, my grandmother, Christian. Everybody down the line was Christian until I get to those first ancestors who came here who were not Christian but practiced Ifa, and it was beaten out of them and forced. Christianity was then forced onto them. So for generations you've been taught Christianity from birth, so of course naturally that's what you're going to gravitate towards, and that's what you're going to become. Now you talk about Kenya as if Kenyan people, just missionaries came in there and said, oh, we're going to teach you Jesus, and the people just went for it. I have so many people that I know, and one or two that I consider friends from Kenya, and who understand their history, and they know that the British who came in and colonized did not come in there with just missionaries. They came in with guns. And through the process of colonization and guns, they converted people into Christianity. Many of the Africans in South Africa, who are in southern Sub-Saharan Africa, who are Christian, it is due to colonization. And in that colonization, yes, they brought missionaries to force Christianity onto the people at the barrel of a gun. So, but if you want to join your master, your conquerors, you go ahead and join your masters and your conquerors, and let us who choose to recognize what history really is talking about look at it and see it for exactly what it was. That none of the people in Africa became Christian or Muslim unless it was at the tip of a spear, a sword, or a gun. Colonization or slavery. That is how Christianity spread. But you got to have your cognitive dissonance because you are so fearful of hell that you can't see it any other way. But you go ahead and have a great day. Remember always, you got to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibration.